Hey, what's up guys? Today we're going to be talking about the best 4-star characters that everyone should be building in Honkai Star Rail in order for you to spend your resources wisely, build strong teams, and clear all the content that this game has to offer. A lot of the 4-star characters in this game are surprisingly good, especially when you build and play them efficiently, which is what we are going to talk about right now. Alright, so starting this list off, we do have Pela. Pela is a character who I absolutely love because I believe the value she brings is honestly kind of insane. Pela is primarily a debuffer as she is the nihility path, and her main role is to reduce the defense of enemies. This can be done through her ultimate or also through her technique outside of combat, and the defense reduction that she applies is not only something that is quite significant with the exact numbers scaling up on your level, but is also something that will last for 2 turns and that will increase your damage significantly. In most games that I've played, defense reduction has always been not only valuable but also very rare, and Honkai Star Rail is no different. She is the premier defense shredding support, which means that your carry or your team damage overall will go up significantly when you do debuff the enemies that you're fighting. This is great because the harder enemies you fight, the higher level ones, the ones with more defense, can be significantly easier to defeat when their defense is reduced thanks to Pela. She's a character who scales really well the more you invest into just all your units, in my opinion, as at least from what we know so far, it does seem like defense reduction is always useful even the more you scale into the game, so Pela is definitely a great support to invest into. Also, her damage as like a sub DPS or as a support is honestly surprisingly good. This is mostly because of her passive talents that you do have to unlock, but she will deal more damage when you debuff enemies, and it's just a character who, as I said, her skill will deal surprisingly good damage while primarily being used for defense reduction thanks to her ultimate or her technique. If that wasn't enough, Pela's skill will also remove a buff from an enemy, which can potentially save your life or at least be useful, while also dealing strong single target damage, as I mentioned. Do keep in mind that since her defense shred is so important, you want to make sure you have good hit rate, which is something you can do on your build if you're fighting enemies with high resistance to debuffs. Also, you can go for many supportive light cones, like the 4-star one of the man with his exposed back, which I always forget the name of, that reduces the defense of opponents even further. Oh, and also I thought it was worth mentioning that this buff removal from Pela is not only just good and versatile, but can even do crazy things like preventing an enemy from reviving if it is considered a buff, like in the situation you're seeing right here, where this enemy was supposed to be brought back to life, but didn't because of Pela. Obviously, this doesn't work for like boss phases, but still, this buff removal is great in many different situations. Moving on, the next character I want to talk about is none other than Tingyun. Tingyun is a character who everyone has been talking about, so I want to keep this section pretty brief, but she's someone who I love and have loved since the closed beta as a character who is just very strong, at least in terms of a buffing utility support. As well, I believe Bronya is also a great unit if you have her. Tingyun is a 4-star, meaning she's very accessible and will also focus on giving you a ton of energy as well as a ton of damage, which are both incredibly relevant. What Tingyun does, if you don't know, is act as a strong buffer, giving a single ally energy and also increasing their damage for 2 turns. She also has a skill that will buff an ally, giving them some attack and also an additional hit of lightning damage through your Tingyun, but scaling on that character's attack. So extra lightning damage based on your carry's attack, for example, if you use her with someone like Sealy, means that she can also give you a pretty nice amount of passive damage, with her ultimate being the main focus of her kit. She's also a character who can use her skill points quite efficiently, as her burst buff will last for 2 turns and her skills will last for 3, which means that you will have some turns to basic attack to generate those skill points, which will also deal some additional damage thanks to a passive talent that you have, where the ally that you buffed will attack alongside your Tingyun. And so for all those reasons, I believe she's an invaluable support character that literally everyone should build, provided you can fit her in your team. Really great, very, very efficient, and also when you're building her, just make sure you have energy because her ultimate is so important. You want to make sure you can get some energy on things like light cones or relics so that you can use it as often as possible. Now, the next character I want to talk about is going to be the exception to the 4-star rule, but they're a free character, so I think it should count, and that is going to be the main character of the game. I honestly believe that the main character in this game is a very strong support to have, notably once you get the fire element. Fire MC is something you can unlock by progressing through the story and completing the Yurillo storyline, where after it, your main character will turn into this great shielder, this tanky support, who will constantly provide a small shield to your entire team every single time you attack on your main character. Also, to clarify, while the shield may be small at the start, once you actually start gearing your main character, start giving them defense and building them correctly, this shield will actually ramp up to be quite significant, especially as a passive one that you'll get every single turn as you attack, use a skill, or use an ultimate, while also having access to a taunt for very powerful hits on your skill. This is an ability that you don't have to use. You can kind of just use your normal attacks on your MC, and then when an enemy is going to unleash a big hit or locks onto one of your allies, you can use a taunt to tank all of the damage. Your Trailblazer will also gain a significant amount of damage reduction, which again will scale on the level of your skill, which will mean that they can typically tank the damage with ease and then just get healed back up with your healer. If that wasn't enough, your ultimate is a pretty nice amount of bonus burst damage, scaling on your defense and your attack, while your shields will scale on your defense, meaning that you can focus your build into that. Your MC will also passively stack up magma will stacks as you are hit, which will cause your basic basic attacks to become enhanced once you have 4 stacks, so you can kind of try to get this as early as possible to passively just deal more damage with your basic attacks and then taunt when you need to. Because this character is purely free to play as the main character and someone who you need to level for the story as well, I believe they're a safe investment, at least for the early to mid game, although they do seem to be a character who scales pretty well in content like the simulated universe, where you can go the preservation path and sort of out tank or out heal the enemies with a defensive team comp, but more on that in a future video. Overall, I just really like the main character as a great defensive utility option who will also deal a surprisingly decent amount of damage. Alright, now next up, I wanted to quickly mention Natasha. As you guys know, Natasha is one of the only 2 healers in the game alongside Bailu, and the reason why I believe she's someone that you should invest to is the following. First of all, she's a free-to-play character and one of the only 2 healers as I mentioned, which means that she's going to be invaluable as either your only healer option if you don't have the 5-star Bailu, or as a second one for your other team, since in the later floors of the Forgotten Hall, you will be needing 2 teams of 4 characters. If that wasn't enough though, what can make her better at times than Bailu is the fact that Natasha has a cleanse and Bailu doesn't. Cleanses are insanely useful at removing debuffs in this game, and even in early simulated universe worlds, there's already enemies that can apply debuffs to you, like stacks of bleed, which as you can see here, would deal a lot of damage every turn to you, crippling you away, but a cleanse can easily remove this and help save your life. The same can be said with some stuns, where your character will be unable to act. Having a 2-in-1 cleanser and healer will prove to be very useful and a safe investment, especially as a character that everyone gets for free. With that said, when you're comparing Natasha to the 5-star healer, yeah, Bailu will heal more, sometimes almost twice as much, but it is overhealing. Like, yeah, healing a lot is important, but it's not the only reason you pick a healer. The other things they offer you are also very important, and Natasha giving you a cleanse is a huge thing. Now, granted, there are other forms of cleanse like March 7th's shield or Bronya if you have her, but having more than one can be convenient, but obviously there are alternatives to cleanse. It's just that having a 2-in-1, as I mentioned multiple times already, is very good. Do note that this cleanse or debuff removal is something that you'll unlock when you reach character ascension 2, so be sure to level her and not neglect her so you actually unlock some of her most important passives that make her who she is. And now, since we're on the topic of cleanses, I do think it's a good time to include 2 honorable mentions before I get to the 5th character I actually want to talk about. The first of which being March 7th, who has a cleanse on her shield, which again is very useful for the reasons I just mentioned. A lot of the harder content does have these debuffs or like burn stacks or whatever that enemies will apply on you, and March 7th will give you a ton of shields that can really help you in early game content and just content in general. She can save your life when you're going to take a lot of damage by shielding the character that is going to be targeted, and while also having some really good counterattacks whenever a character that is shielded is attacked. Now, do keep in mind that these counters that March 8th will be doing will happen anytime a shielded ally is attacked, and this can be a shield from any source. This means that using March with, for example, the Fire Trailblazer, who can shield your whole party, means that your March 9th will be hitting these counters anytime any ally is attacked, not just one who is shielded by her. Overall, there are some great uses for March 10th, and I do like this character a lot. I just think that she's not as vital to build. There's definitely teams that don't need her, but she's a quite convenient free-to-play character that I at least wanted to mention. Similarly, I did want to quickly mention Asta as a character who scales well with like investment and stuff, especially if you can build her for the content where she's useful. As a fire character who excels at, first of all, breaking shields, any shield that has a fire weakness can be surprisingly easy to deal with Asta. The main part of her kit though is her ultimate. It's a very nice supportive buff that will increase the speed of all of your allies for 2 turns. This means that it's pretty much always useful. Speed is very relevant in this game, allowing you to attack faster and ideally kill enemies before they hit you. Asta's passive talent will also give you attack buffs, stacking every single time Asta hits a different enemy, with it gaining 2 stacks instead of 1 if the enemy has fire resistance. So again, these fire resistant enemy scenarios are really where Asta can shine, as well as just having a versatile ultimate that gives you speed. Also, while the stack count will go down as the turns pass, there are some eidolons that help negate this in case you do get multiple copies of her, like her 2nd or 6th eidolon. Lastly, now that we talked about the honorable mentions that are more, I guess, niche but still really good, I wanted to talk about the 5th character, and this is actually going to be a hunt character, with the exact one varying on who you have and what you're trying to do. In fact, while I think Sushang is the most generalistic, like good 4-star hunt carry, really good single target damage, summons a giant big chicken, and is just super strong as a hunt carry, I think that just mentioning a hunt character here is going to be the better way of doing this, because there are conditions where each of these characters can be very good depending on who you have. First of all, if you have Sealy or Zila, I definitely would recommend using her as your hunt carry, and then maybe you don't have to level another, or you can level a second one for your second team in certain content, as I mentioned earlier, with another great second option being Heng, who has some pretty strict conditions to follow to get his maximum damage, but if you build a team correctly and know how to play him, he can also be extremely powerful, and I think people are underrating him and overrating Sushang a little, although keep in mind, I think Sushang is great, really strong, and you should invest into her. She is definitely one of the strongest carries in this game, especially as a 4-star option, really powerful, with Heng being similar if you can proc his passive talents, which make it to where he'll gain more damage if you target him with an ability, and this can be a heal, but typically it'll be a buff from anyone like Tingyun, Bronya, even a shield from March 7th, him so many different synergies you can do to give him that resistance pen, making his next hit deal a lot more damage. So you'd want to use his burst with this, with him also dealing significantly more damage, like close to double, against enemies that are slowed. What this means is that you want to make sure you slow enemies with his skill, which hits multiple times and will slow when you crit. So multiple times to hit. So even if your crit rate isn't that high, there's a good chance you're slowing. And then making sure you're buffed to get this wind resistance pen, and then using your ultimate for a huge amount of damage. Again, someone like Sushang can be more consistent, but Heng, if you follow these conditions and play him properly, can actually have higher highs and can deal bigger damage, which doesn't necessarily make him better. That's not what I'm saying. I'm just saying there are many different hunt characters you can use that are all great, depending on who you have, your team, and how you're playing. Investing in the one that is right for you is a good thing to do. You can also run 2 in the same team or 1 on each team. I really think having hunt carries that are built is going to be essential to carrying you through many different types of content. And similarly, Yanqing can be another great hunt carry, but he is someone who, at least from my understanding of him and the testing that I did in the closed beta, is someone who has a ton of good damage skillings, but who's also one who gains a ton of buffs until he gets hit. So that is definitely something you're gonna have to play around. Overall, having hunt carries is very valuable. Sushang and Heng being the 4 stars that I'm talking about in this video, but I did want to mention the whole category in case you do have the 5 stars and don't want to invest into too many characters, or if, for example, you plan on continuously pulling on Seely's banner, or if you plan on skipping her. Overall, if this video has anything that I want to change, it will be in a pinned comment. Since this game is still new, and while I did get to play it a lot in the closed betas, there might still be additional information that I want to add or change as the meta advances and as time progresses. I really hope this video was helpful. Enjoy building these 5 to 7 characters that I mentioned, as I really do think they will help you in your journey, provided you build good teams for all of them. Thanks so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed, and as always, I'll catch you guys in the next one. Peace.